Hi, I'm Dr. Melva, your board-certified radiation oncologist and serial entrepreneur and investor. Welcome to the 1% Code podcast. I help top income earners create multiple streams of income to support the career they love or the one they want to love again. Learn more on the 1% Code podcast. Right. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the 1% Code podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Melva Pinn-Bingham, board-certified radiation oncologist, wife, serial entrepreneur, and investor, and I help top income earning professionals create a lucrative passive income stream, and I do that through my podcasts and courses. I am so happy for you to join me for this episode. Today, we have a special guest, Dr. Brent Lacey. Dr. Brent Lacey, thanks so much for joining us. We're happy to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me, Dr. Melva. I am super excited. We just had you on my podcast. It was awesome, and can't wait for a repeat here.
Awesome. So for those of you just meeting Dr. Brent Lacey, he is a gastroenterologist who is passionate about helping physicians succeed with business and personal finances. As a physician, he understands how overwhelming it can be to step out of a clinical training and into a career, and he has seen firsthand the lack of education on how to run a practice and manage finances. He has coached hundreds of families to succeed in building personal wealth and stellar careers, and has spoken to physician groups around the country on topics related to business and personal finance. That's also why he founded the Scope of Practice website. His goal is to help physicians learn how to grow their leadership skills, their business, and their personal finances. Wow, I love that. So I kind of want to just start and let my audience, if they don't know you yet, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit more about what you founded and how you help families, and let's start there. A little bit about you.
Yeah, well, I got started through teaching Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University at my church. Started about 6 years ago or so, and I think I taught it probably 12 or 13 times over the course of a few years, and just really loved it. Loved seeing people go from being hopeless to being extremely hopeful about the future, go from completely chaotic and disorganized to having a solid plan, from going from living paycheck to paycheck to, making real progress and really working towards their goals. And really enjoyed that, and started getting asked by some of the people at my hospital to do some talks up there, and did a talk for the nurses, and then got asked to do a talk for the residents and the students. Just how do you set up a basic retirement plan, or how do you budget, things like that. And started doing it more and more. And the more I realized this is a huge need. There's a lot of people that are struggling out here with this stuff. And so started looking into physician personal finance. And at the time, there really wasn't a whole lot out there. There's a few big sites, but there was definitely a big need that was, I think, going unfulfilled. And really decided that in addition to personal finance, that there was a lot of really lack of knowledge and lack of training and experience for physicians to become the leaders in business that we need to be. Because I don't know about your med school, but we certainly didn't have any classes on that when I was in med school. I had the good fortune to be in some leadership experiences when I was in college that were phenomenally transformative, but most people don't get that. And I really felt like that was something that was bad and needed fixing. And so the Scope of Practice was born. And so now I've got a blog and a podcast, and, we're launching some online courses, and got a big summit coming up this fall. I mean, just all kinds of great stuff going on, just like you're doing with 1% Code here.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let me start out. Is it okay if I ask you a challenging question?
I love challenging questions.
Right, it might be slightly controversial. So you mentioned Dave Ramsey, and I think a lot of times, a lot of my audience, physicians, lawyers, dentists, high income earners, right? A lot of times I think Dave Ramsey or Susie Orman, some of the more mainstream, don't necessarily cater to the higher income professional. So I'm really curious to see how that translated for you, or if you found that being the same.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I think it translates partly. And I think that the kinds of mistakes that are common in folks who are in the very low income tax brackets are the same mistakes that are common with physicians and lawyers and high income earners. It's very interesting. So I've coached people from, making as little as $14,000 a year on Social Security to $600,000-$700,000 a year as a dermatologist or orthopedic surgeon. And the thing that's really funny about it is that everyone on that entire income spectrum tends to make the same kinds of mistakes, but the only difference is that high income earners, we just make the same mistakes with more zeros on the end. And so what I find is that most of the philosophies espoused through the Dave Ramsey teachings, I think, are highly applicable. And I will say this, I think it is very easy to follow Dave Ramsey's plan to the letter and retire incredibly wealthy. There is absolutely a great mathematical certainty to that. Now, that being said, I think that physicians and dentists and lawyers are not the average Joe, right? We're substantially more educated. We're substantially more discipline oriented on balance. And so I think once we gain a certain amount of financial literacy and good financial habits, I think that the doors do open a little bit, and we have some opportunities to responsibly stray, if you will, from the Dave Ramsey plan. But one of the things that I find on the flip side of that is that it's very common for physicians to think that they're immune to everything. I see lots of blogs out there that say Dave Ramsey is bad for doctors. And I go through and I read this and I'm like, this was written by a broke guy in his mother's basement. For sure it was. Right. And so I think that there is a lot of good there. And I think that there are some ways in which you can deviate from the plan and do exceptionally well. So in order for Dave and for Susie to really have the kind of audience that they do, and in order for them to have any level of integrity, they have to draw a really hard line in the sand in terms of no debt ever and things like that. And I think once we as physicians gain a certain level of responsibility and discipline and success built on consistently making good financial choices, then it's okay to start exploring some alternative paths.
Okay. I think that's a great answer. It is definitely a mindset. It's definitely, I was listening to, I forget whose talk it was, but they were talking about the concept of wealth. And, someone who's you're coaching that makes $14,000 a year could be much wealthier than someone that brings in $600,000 a year, depending on what decisions they make with that money and how they leverage it and those behaviors. So I definitely see that. So I want to switch into debt. Okay. That's like that 4-letter word people talk about. Many top income earners come out of out of school with loads of debt. It ends up being a topic or pain point for a lot of people. And I know that, you have some thoughts on debt, and I want you to tell me a little bit more. You've talked about the debt cascade before. Can we delve into that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is important for people to recognize is that, number one, debt is bad as a general concept. There are a few exceptions to that rule. And I would never, ever say that debt is good, but there are certain kinds of debt that I would consider to be acceptable for a short time, like taking a mortgage out on your house, for example. But in general, I tend to be a big fan of people getting out of debt and staying out of debt. Every study of American millionaires that's ever been done has shown that is the quickest path to building wealth, is getting out of debt and lifetime generally staying away from debt. You will become wealthy if you can do that. Now, that being said, the thing that most people, I think, struggle with early on is not really having a plan of attack. And so when you come out of residency, you come out of fellowship, you've been in college and med school and postgraduate training, and maybe that's 10, 12, 15 years, and you've been holding your breath for a long time. And all of a sudden it's like, I got all this money, and I've got a bunch of ideas of things I want to do with it. I'm going to buy a house. I'm going to buy a car. I'm going to send my kids to private schools. I'm going to move into this nice neighborhood. And all those things are fine. None of those things are evil. And if you want to do that, go for it. It's totally fine. But the problem that I find is that people do that all at once so quickly without thinking about what that is going to do to their long-term financial situation. And so what I generally encourage people to do is make a plan early on and make it a priority in your family's life to get out of debt quickly. And when I say debt, I specifically mean consumer debt. And so that's anything that's not your mortgage. And so there's a lot of different systems out there. People may have heard of the debt snowball. Dave Ramsey's popular for that. There's the debt avalanche I've heard people use, which is sort of the snowball flipped over on its head. The debt cascade is a concept that I came up with. It is basically a hybrid of those two models, takes basically the best of both models. And so in the debt cascade model, what we do is you take all of your debts, you list them out on a piece of paper with the interest rate and the total balance. Anything that has a balance under $5,000, that goes at the top of your list. And you list it in order of smallest balance to largest balance. So let's say you've got a 0% furniture loan for $400. And then you've got a car loan for $3,000, and you've got a personal loan for $4,000. List those in order from smallest balance to largest balance. And then what you're going to do is you're going to pay, and then everything underneath that, so you're going to draw a line right there, and then everything underneath that, you're going to list it in terms of highest interest rate to lowest interest rate. Okay. And I'm going to explain the philosophy behind this concept. So the idea here is that at any given time, you're focused on only one debt. You're paying minimum payments on everything on that list. Maybe you've got 8 or 10 things on that list. You're paying minimum payments on everything except the very top one. And you're attacking it like crazy. You're knocking it out. You're putting $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 a month on it, whatever you can get by. Knock those things out very, very quickly. The idea of listing the $5,000 and below debts up top is so that you can knock them out really quickly. If you have a list of 10 or 12 things and you're putting minimum payments or an equal amount on each one, it may take a year before any of them drop off the list. And that's hard. It's really hard to see those things staring at you month after month after month. But every time you knock one of those things off the list, you feel like you're gaining a little momentum. You're like, hey, I had 10, now I've got 9. The next month you're like, hey, I knocked out 2 more. I'm down to 7. I'm now down to 7 now. And so you keep knocking those out one by one. And every time that you pay one off, now the minimum payment that was going to that is going to the next one, and it keeps on rolling over. In the debt snowball method, they just recommend listing smallest balance to largest balance and going like that. It doesn't allow you to take advantage of paying off high interest rate loans first. Right. With the debt avalanche concept, they pay off highest interest rate to lowest interest rate. That doesn't give you the opportunity to have some quick wins up front to let you feel like you're building some of that momentum. And that's where the concept of this cascade was born, is to give you a little bit of the best of both worlds. So anything less than $5,000, you're knocking that out pretty quickly. And then once you build some quick wins, you've got some habits. You're like, okay, I'm paying off debt every month. I'm paying off debt every month. I'm paying off debt every month. Then you're settled into a routine. And then it's a lot easier to go, okay, this is just something that I'm devoting money to, and I know I'm in it for the long haul. Now I'm going to start focusing on things that are high interest rates and really take advantage of the mathematical reality of knocking down those high interest rates first.
Okay. So I hope our listeners stop and took some really good notes on that, or rewind and listen to that again. I do have a question about that. So, and just full disclosure, I believe I've taken Dave Ramsey's course, or at one point early on after I, like you said, got out of school and knew exactly how much I was going to get from the first job. I actually got payments during residency as like the guarantee. I remember going to the financial advisor, and I did exactly what you said. I think we took all the money we're going to get, and we gave him the balance sheet, and he's like, do you have anything left? You're going to decide to spend this and do that? I'm like, well, the house that we got, maybe that wasn't the smartest. But so I've been through the Dave Ramsey's course. I guess the question I have is, what about when people are looking from, let's say, a cash flow? So a lot of times we talk about a cash flow, and, in real estate investing, or when we're leveraging kind of in the space that I am, this kind of 1% code of taking our money and going into another product. How do you look at the interest rate and the total versus how much is going out every month? So for example, let's say that I have a line of credit that was maxed out, and the balance is, let's say, $20,000, and the payment is $730 a month. And then I have a car loan, for example, that's a $23,000 car loan, and the payment is $1,900 a month. And one interest rate, let's say the $730 interest rate is like 5%, and the car loan is like 6%. Are you looking at the percentage, or are you looking at how much you're going to save per month between the amount of, let's say, $730 versus, $1,800? Did I confuse you, or you follow?
No, I'm with you. So in the early stages, I don't really worry about that kind of thing too much, because I want all the debt out of your life. And so I'm not so much focused on what it's going to do to my cash flow, because if I've got $500,000 in debt between student loans and car loans and credit card loans and no interest furniture loans and personal loans in this example that we just gave, I'm not really looking to have people leverage themselves into additional debt at that point. The problem is that with the leverage concept, there's a lot of great returns to be made, as you and I have discussed before. The challenge is if you pull that trigger too soon, you can very quickly find yourself over leveraged, and then you are at the mercy of every little thing that blows your way. So, for example, I know a lot of people that were leveraged appropriately, or leveraged, I'll say this, leveraged within their means, within their cash flow means, until COVID hit last year, and their business dropped by 85%. And all of a sudden, this leverage that was working really well suddenly is massively not. And the debts keep coming and the payments keep being required every month, and your income is dropped by 85%. Our income in our practice, all of our doctors voluntarily stopped taking any paycheck for months while we couldn't pay all of our employees. I mean, it was legitimately months before we were making anything at all. And so, and that's an example of a once in a lifetime kind of a thing. At least I hope it is. But there's any number of things that can do that, right? So your spouse gets sick and you got to take a couple months off to help them with their cancer treatments, or you get disabled and you're not able to be insured from a disability insurance standpoint. Any number of things like that can happen. And so the leverage concept works when you've got cushion and when you've got some margin in your life. And early on, I generally don't recommend that kind of thing. Get out of your student loans, get out of your car payments, get yourself down to a point where you're not in debt. And maybe that takes 3 years or 5 years. But here's the thing, the thing that I hear people talk about is I hear a lot of FOMO, right? So they're like, "Oh, Brent, I want those returns, man." It's like, if I miss out on those 5 years of investing, I mean, that's a lot of compound interest. I'm like, yeah, that's true in a mathematical sense. But what you're not taking into account is the risk that the debt provides for you. And you're not taking into account the loss of autonomy and flexibility. So I see lots of people that have to pass up on job opportunities because they're stuck into such an incredible amount of student loan debt that they have to stay with a job that they don't really want long-term in order to qualify for public service loan forgiveness. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it is limiting. And I want people out of those shackles as soon as possible. And there, Dave and Susie and I do agree. But here's the thing with physician incomes, man, if you're attacking that debt quickly, if you're living like a student, living like a resident, you can knock that out in a couple of years. I've got lots and lots of people that I've worked with, and there's lots of great bloggers on the internet, physicians too, that knocked out all their debt in 18 months, 24 months, 36 months. If you've been holding your breath for 12 years, another 18 months really isn't the end of the world. Live like a student for just a little while longer, knock it out, and then you got 40 years of your life to invest whatever you want.
Right. Very good point. But I think that goes into really the next question I wanted to ask you. So as physicians, top income earners, they can totally knock out the debt. There are lots of success stories. I think we've all seen those. But in another thing you talk about is spouses and marriage and relationships. And I think a lot of that, I don't know the stats, but I'm pretty sure the number one cause of divorce is still over finances. Is that correct?
100%.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So like for me, for example, I am married to a real estate investor, entrepreneur, stay-at-home dad. And I've been the bread maker for the majority of the marriage, and that was a decision. And we have very different financial views sometimes when it comes to debt as an asset versus debt as a risk, and leverage and debt pay down. So what we found, and maybe you found with a lot of different spouses, is it's a hard topic to discuss, and bringing in other people into that marriage sometimes is very difficult when you have different viewpoints. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like, how can spouses come together about money when money is the number one conflict in their marriage?
So I think a place to start is by building on on a foundation of success. A lot of times when folks are in a point where they're trying to figure out how to go forward together, they're coming to that point with baggage. They've had fights, they've had tension, they've had struggles, or maybe they just have preconceptions of the way that money should be handled based on how they grew up. And so very often, if you're constantly at odds with each other, I think the first thing you do is find something that you can agree on. And it can be something very small, right? So what I usually like to do at that point is I tell people, look, stop talking about money. Okay. Just stop talking about money and start talking about what you want to do with money. Okay. And so what I'll tell people is go on a date and don't say the word money. Okay. The whole question that you want to answer for the entirety of the day, spend 45 minutes, an hour, 3 hours, whatever, and just dream together. What would we do if we had a fully funded nest egg, whatever that looks like? And it doesn't matter what the number is, 1 million, 3 million, 5 million, whatever. What would we do? Well, I would want to go to live. I would want to have a summer home in Colorado. I'd want to go to travel to Europe once a year. I would want to teach at a medical school part-time. I would want to start a foundation for underprivileged youth in the inner city. Right. Whatever. Start to dream together. Start to build a picture of what you want your life to be, and let that be something that you can get excited about and agree on, and start understanding what each other's goals are, what your motivations are, you'd be amazed at some of the conversations that spouses have had when I've talked to them about this. Like, we had this whole conversation. I never knew that she wanted to go to Europe. I never knew that it was important to him to start his own business someday. Like, these are things that, you got to start talking about. And once you start getting to a place where you're like, okay, we're starting to develop a shared interest in a shared vision for our future, then you can start getting into the nitty gritty of what that really looks like. But it really starts with that first dream date where you just talk about what would we do if money was no longer an object. Right. Once you know what that endpoint is, then you can start working towards. And I think that's a really important place to start.
I think those are great nuggets, and it sounds like that's something that would work with someone to, regardless of what point they were in that relationship and discussions, to really recenter and refocus. Or even if you're working with couples at the very beginning, it's a great time for them to set that up. So that's really good advice. So let's talk about some common mistakes that you see high income earners make that really derail their financial goals.
The question is, what mistakes don't we make? So several big ones, I would say. The first big mistake is it happens right after fellowship or right after residency, after your last stage of training, when you get that first big attending paycheck, is you get sudden spending crazy. And so you buy 2 cars, you buy the house, you enroll your kids in private schools, you do all that stuff all at once. And then you look up and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm $1 million in debt and I can't breathe. Right. And this story is very common. Okay. So that's the first mistake that people make. So I encourage people, when you get that first attending paycheck, don't make any major money decisions for like 6 months. Right. Okay. Take a breath, take a pause. You will make a better decision after you've had 6 months to think about it. Right. So that's the first thing. The second thing I see is like we talked about earlier, is not having an appropriate level of appreciation for the risk and the limitations offered by debt. And so you need to make debt elimination a high priority. The third big thing, and this is key, I see this a lot, is failing to live beneath your means. And this is very common. The mathematics of this are very basic. If you make $200,000 a year and you spend $250,000, you will be broke very quickly. If you make $200,000 a year and you live on $125,000, you will become wealthy very quickly. It is as simple as that. And so knowing what your actual income is and spending less than that total amount is very important. And it's easy for physicians and high income earners to not pay attention to things. And so I know you've talked about cash flow planning, budgeting, and that sort of thing. And a lot of times you say that word and people freak out. They're like, oh no, B word, no. Right, and I tell people, look, here's the thing. I start relating it to medicine, right? So if you're an internal medicine specialist, and you've got someone coming in and their hemoglobin A1C is out of control, what do? You tell them to keep a log of all their sugars, right? It's very simple. It's exactly the same concept. Someone's blood pressure is out of control. Tell them to keep track of their blood pressure every day. If you're trying to lose weight, you check your weight once a day, once a week, twice a week, whatever. You got to be monitoring what you're doing with all your money, or you don't know what's going on. I think those are the really big 3 things. And then, a fourth thing way down the line is not seeking out alternate investment opportunities. A lot of times people get in this habit of, okay, I'm going to pay off debt, I'm going to save, but then never start looking at some alternate streams of income. And I know this is something you talk about a lot, is looking towards, passive income, through alternate means, real estate investing, side hustles, whatever. And so starting to diversify your income stream, that's pretty far down the line, for a lot of people. But I think those are some really key things that physicians and high income earners fail to get.
Right, right. Well, I think those are great tips. I guess I would just add, I think, I agree with you. It's a lot of mindset decisions, how we talked about behaviors and, like relating to Dave Ramsey earlier in the conversation. I think that a lot of us that are successful, it's almost we come from this area of lack because we've been students for so long, paying loans, having to sacrifice. And I think instead of kind of, they don't bring someone with wisdom in front of us before we graduate versus athletes, a lot that are going to professional leagues, they have counseling on how to protect their money, how to grow their finances, which investments to get into, counseling on marriages and, dating type of thing. And I just saw this because when my sister was graduating from UVA, she is doing sports medicine now. And she was around the athletes and she talked about all the training they got. And I'm going, well, I got none of that, coming out into this industry. So I think a lot of these conversations we're having now, I feel like that we could have had them earlier, but I don't know that many of us thought to seek that out.
Yeah. And that's the reason why podcasts like yours and podcasts like mine are so important, is to give physicians that, and, other high income earners, that knowledge, the resources, the encouragement to go out and actually do this well. Because our medical schools and our colleges are not training for this. And there's, like you said, there is so much about money that is really problematic in the world. But the big problem for us is that it just interacts with every portion of our life. And so you have to claim dominion over this portion of your life. And if you don't, it will absolutely own you.
Right. Very, very well said. Very well said. All right. I'm going to ask you a couple more questions and then we'll wrap it up. But I think this has been great. This is great for my listeners. It's great for me. I love someone who's so confident with, over the debt, budgeting, growth, because I think a lot of us, that's a pain point, even at higher levels. It just, like you said, you just add more zeros to the end for debt. So tell me a little bit, and I've heard you talk about this, social indifference and how that impacts our financial plans.
Yeah. So this is a big problem for physicians. Social indifference is the concept that we tell you. You've heard the old expression, keeping up with the Joneses.
Right.
Social indifference is basically not caring what the Joneses are doing. And I don't mean not caring like we quit caring about our neighbors and the people that are in our community, but that you quit letting it affect your day-to-day decision making. So, for example, it is exceedingly common for physicians to buy homes in relatively nice neighborhoods, okay? Which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But your choice of home tends to influence all of your other buying decisions, who your neighbors are and who your friend circle are. And that includes extending into social media. Massively influences your buying decisions. The Joneses are all on Facebook and Instagram, and they are putting all of their highlights from their vacation and their new car and their recent trips and their new clothes and all these different things online. They're showing you their highlight reel and not showing you what else is going on in their life. All you know is the glitz and the glam. And one of the things that always terrifies me is when I hear someone say the words, "When is it going to be my turn?" I feel like it's my turn now. I feel like I've earned this, And as soon as I hear someone say that, it's warning, 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 warning. Right. That is exactly before someone is about to make a decision impulsively that is going to probably cost them a lot of money. And so I try very hard in those situations to say, okay, think about what you want to buy, think about what you want to spend your money on, then return to that dream date that you had with your spouse. Mm-hmm. What is going to be the impact on that long-term goal if you make this decision right now? Right. It is amazing how much people will cool off if they'll just take a week and and just put a moratorium for a week on making a major financial decision. I'm super excited about this car. A Tesla just came on the lot and someone dropped the option on it. It's the color I want. I'm super pumped about it. And I'm going to go buy it because I've earned this. It's my turn. I can't wait to show my friends and family. That's all fine, okay, as far as that goes, if you can afford it. But if you take a breath and you think about it for a minute, and you're like, $80,000 would actually go really a long way towards paying off our debt, and then we can get out of this stupid 1-bedroom apartment and get into a nice house, right? Think about those things. It's really, really important. So social indifference is where you stop letting the decisions of others affect your daily decisions, and you make the decision that's best for your family based on what you can legitimately afford and based on what you and your spouse have decided is right for you.
Right. Wow. I think that is really awesome advice. And I didn't realize that catchphrase was a red flag, but I definitely think I've heard myself say that before. What you would call an impulsive buy. Like, it was coming out of residency, and we got the house in the in the golf community, and it was either that or a house on the water, and we had like a 2 and 4 year old. We didn't need to be in a golf community with senior citizens. So, after we sold that house, it was like, well, why did we get here in the first place? But yeah, it's that I definitely relate to that. And I think a lot of people do. I've earned this. And again, I think it's from that scarcity mindset of the sacrifice that we've taken. And what you're suggesting that the listeners do is to rewrite that story that they're telling themselves. So to say, instead of I earned this, usually insert material thing, reposition that to that vision of where you want to be. And I think that's a powerful exercise for people to do.
Yeah, settling for things that are good now can keep you from getting what's best later.
Right, exactly. Very good, very good. So, one last question. So, what is the tax? And again, I've heard you talk about this, the tax efficient waterfall concept for retirement investing.
Yeah, so one of the things that's really important for high income earners to pay very close attention to is the tax efficiency of your overall investments. And what I mean by that is that you need to be paying attention to the way in which your various investments and your various accounts are taxed, because it is very difficult to find anything that will beat the returns of saving money on taxes. So, for example, if you've got investments in just a taxable account, let's say you've got in the stock market, you're getting dividends from an issue of stock, and you make $10,000 in dividends in 1 year. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in the top income tax bracket, and that's, 37, 40%, depending on what year it is,
Right.
If that's getting taxed to ordinary income rate, that's a big, big hit, right? That's upwards of $4,000 on that $10,000 that suddenly went out the window.
Right.
If instead you have that money invested in something that can be taxed at long-term capital gains rate, now you're talking about an investment that's taxed at 15%, not 40. And as soon as you make that decision, that is an instant 25% return on your money. So if you're taxed at 15% and you're losing $1,500 versus taxed at 40% and you're losing $4,000, that's $2,500 you just saved yourself. Okay, now multiply that times 50 over the course of your life. You're talking about huge savings. There are very, very few things that we can do that beats having a tax efficient portfolio. And so the concept of the tax efficient waterfall basically is taking a series of steps in a row that take advantage of certain investment vehicles that are very efficient for taxes. So, for example, at the very top of the waterfall is going to be the match on your 401k. So your 401k, especially if you're in a Roth 401k, is highly, highly tax efficient. Okay, so if it's a traditional 401k, it's going to be tax deferred. If it's a Roth, then it goes in after tax, but you're saving money on taxes somewhere right there. And then you take the match on top of that. If your employer offers a match to all the funds or some of the funds that you're putting in, that is an instant 100% rate of return. You got to max that out. And that is the one area where I do recommend people do take advantage when they're still paying off debt. Mathematically, it nauseates me to think about giving away free money. And so I do make an exception for that. So you max out the match on your 401k. Then the next move down is actually one that not a lot of people use. And this is the concept I like to use, is the health savings account. Okay. So the health savings account is the only account that is triple tax benefit if you spend it only on healthcare savings. It basically acts like an IRA, but for health savings, for health expenses. And so it goes in untaxed, it grows tax-free, and it comes out tax-free. So it is a huge tax savings. So if you have and everyone's going to have health expenses later in life, it's inevitable, right? You will, unless you die of a heart attack at 54, hope you don't. But unless that happens, you are likely to have health expenses eventually. So you might as well fly in the face of it. So take that advantage of that triple tax benefit. And then you start walking down a series of steps. And then it's the 401k, the Roth IRA, or the backdoor Roth IRA, and then into things like passive real estate investing and things like that. But the idea is basically paying attention to the taxes on your portfolio so that you can take maximum advantage of legal tax savings, because man, taxes at the high income rates. I mean, when I was making, under the poverty level, which was, for a long time, I didn't worry about taxes. I didn't pay any net taxes, right? And now we pay an ungodly amount of taxes. It's insane. Right. And that's fine. I mean, that's fine. That's the way it is, and that's okay. But there's no reason that we can't take advantage of the legal loopholes, I say loopholes, but the legal realities available to us by positioning our money in places where it is going to be taxed less heavily. And if you're not able to pay attention to that carefully and know the nuances of it, this is where a CPA or a tax advisor can be extremely helpful. I will fully admit to not being an expert on taxes. So this is definitely an area where having a professional can be super helpful.
Right. Awesome. Well, you have taught me so much, and hopefully my audience has enjoyed it. I don't think it's ever too late to start really thinking, because you can change. It's like kind of the 1% code I talk about is the 1% change. You can make 1% by making a small change, and eventually you'll get to 100%. So I think people should be inspired and encouraged to know that there are doctors out here like you who have figured this out. And like you said, a lot of other ones. If they want to learn more about the things that you've talked about, everything money and debt and financial planning, where can we find you?
So I'm out at thescopeofpractice.com is the website, and people can access the blog and the podcast through there. Closing in on 100 episodes now. And so we got great stuff. We got great guests, including your very own Dr. Melva, and she was fantastic. So people definitely need to go check that out. And then this fall, November 15th through 17th, I'm hosting an online summit for free called Marriage and Money MD. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a lot of the stuff we've been talking about today, where we're going to have 18 physicians and physician spouses speaking about topics related to marriage and money. So how to get on the same page, how to talk about money without fighting, how to communicate effectively, conflict resolution. We're going to talk about sex. There's going to be all kinds of great stuff going on. Right. So, and it's free for people to sign up. If people want to sign up at marriageandmoneymd.com, and you can sign up for free. And registration's open. So we'll be having a lot of great stuff coming in the weeks leading up to the summit. And just as a special thing for your listeners, to say thank you for letting me come on. If people are interested in upgrading to the All Access Pass, I'm offering a 25% discount for your podcast listeners if they use the code 1% code. So 1, the percent sign, and the word code, and they can get 25% off. But even if they don't want to do All Access, just sign up for free, marriageandmoneymd.com.
Awesome. Well, that's great. 25% off is fabulous. So take advantage of that, listeners. And just a question, is it for physicians only, or any healthcare professionals, or
anybody, any high income earner? I mean, it's primarily targeting physicians, but this is absolutely applicable across all ends of the spectrum in terms of income, and especially the higher income earners. So your dentists, your lawyers, your engineers, your accountants. I mean, all the way down to, teachers and construction workers. I mean, this is going to be awesome.
Right. Well, wow. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Brent Lacey. You all need to register for that conference. Tell me again, it's Marriage and Money MD.
Marriage and Money. Yep. marriageandmoneymd.com.
marriageandmoneymd.com. Check out the Scope of Practice podcast. Congratulations again on your 100 episodes. This was a fabulous episode. I learned a lot. Please check them out. And thank you again so much for being on the 1% Code podcast. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the 1% Code podcast, please share with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating, and I would love your 5-star review. To catch all the latest from me, you can follow me on all social media channels at Dr. spelled out DoctorMelva at Dr. Melva. And I want to make sure that you and anyone else you know that would benefit from the 1% Code podcast is a member of my private community on Facebook. the 1% Code Collective. I would love for you to join me there. Link in the bio. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.